Chapter 24. The Cultural Revolution took yet another twist in the autumn of 1968, when a new party directive was issued called Cleansing Class Enemies. It was designed to identify and re-educate or remove class enemies from the ranks of the revolutionary masses. Mama was summoned to a mass meeting where the new policy was articulated. The capitalist intellectuals of our nation live in large buildings in the cities, and many of them live capitalist lives, a propaganda team leader proclaimed. Your lavish life is supported by the back-breaking labor of the poor and lower-middle peasants. Because of this division, it's impossible for intellectuals to understand the real cost of the lives you live. And it is impossible for you to reform your thoughts, since thoughts grow from experience. If you are incapable of reforming your own thoughts, he concluded, you're unqualified to teach students. Teachers and students of all institutions of higher learning will move to the countryside to live with the peasants, share their labor, their food, their huts, and their daily routine, and learn from them by doing what they do. From this experience and this experience alone can genuine thought reform and real revolution emerge. The faculty and students of Anhui University, he said, would be sent to live among peasants at the Wujiang People's Commune in Hexian County, 100 miles east of Hefei. Children were exempt from the directive. 2 rooms in the University Child Care Center would be transformed into a special holding facility for them. The cost of maintaining children was to be deducted from their parents' salaries. Mama came home deeply worried. You will remain here, she told us. But Papa and I have to go away. When? I asked nervously. How long? Yiding added. I don't know, she replied. When Yicun began to whimper, Mama put him on her lap and comforted him. Yimao and Yiding will take care of you. Papa and I will write to you. Mama told me that I was old enough to watch over my brothers and to make sure they had enough to eat and were cared for if they became ill. I became a parent to my 5-year-old brother and a guardian of my 12-year-old brother. What remained of my childhood was over. I was 10 years old. Many meetings were held during the next week to explain the logistics of the move and the routine of life in the countryside. Apartments were to be locked after the residents departed. When someone was properly re-educated and sent home, they could reoccupy the same apartment. Until that day, the campus would be a ghost town, with only the child care center operational. On December 20th, one day before the scheduled departure, Papa was released from the cowshed. Yicun clung to him throughout the day. In the afternoon, our mother took the bus downtown and bought bread and sweets for us to take to the child care center. She meticulously packed a bag of clothing for each of us and rolled up straw mats, blankets, and sheets for our bedding. After dinner, Mama tied the key to the door on the string around my neck. She told me if any of us needed more clothing, I should return home to get it. When it was time for Yiding and me to leave, we slung our bedrolls over our shoulders and picked up our bags. Yiding's parting words were, "Don't worry, Mama and Papa." "Mama, I'll take care of everything," I affirmed. I strained to keep my voice from breaking. I wanted to cry, to go to my own bed, to stay at home. I looked up into Mama's eyes and saw that she, too, was forcing back tears. I waved goodbye. In the center, I found that 6 girls had been assigned to one room and 15 boys to another. Children 6 and under were housed in 3 other rooms. When I went to my room, I found Xiaolan lying on her bedroll on the floor, staring at the ceiling. "Xiaolan!" I squealed in delight. "Mama!" she said and jumped up. We unrolled our bedding next to hers and sat together for the next hour, talking about and guessing at what life might be like in this facility. My parents had prepared wooden placards that they were required to carry as they marched out of the city. Papa wrote on his placard, "It is hard for any person to avoid mistakes, but one should make as few as possible. When a mistake is made, one should correct it, and the more quickly and thoroughly, the better." Mama told Yichun it was time to take him to the center. She held him, and Papa picked up his bedroll and a bag of clothing. They walked out into the starless winter night. Yichun wrapped his arms around Mama's neck. Along the way, he began to cry. "I want to stay with you, Papa," he whined. "I am afraid." "Yiding and Yimao will be at the center, darling," Mama reminded him. "They will take care of you." "I don't want you to go," he sobbed. They stopped. Papa put on the bags and took Yichun from Mama. Yichun buried his face against Papa's shoulder. Inside the center, the woman in charge, Comrade Pan, demanded, "Why are you so late?" She was one of the teachers who daily placed Yichun on the potty chair and refused to allow him to play with others. She was a chubby woman with a tiny nose, narrow eyes, and big, protruding teeth. She was a party member and an enthusiastic speaker at rallies. When she was angry, her eyes seemed to close completely, and she leaned close to the object of her anger, as if she were going to bite. The children were terrified of her wrath. "I am sorry," Mama responded contritely. "We had many things to take care of." "We have many things to take care of here," Comrade Pan snapped. "Now hurry." "Where will he stay?" Mama asked. "The 2 to 4-year-olds are there," Comrade Pan answered, pointing to a large room where a dozen Youngsters had already put down their mats and blankets. Mama knelt and carefully unrolled Yichun's mat and blanket. Yichun watched from my father's arms. Papa put him down and gently pulled his hands free of his neck. Yichun grabbed Papa's leg, locked his fingers together, and began to wail. Other children sat up to watch. Comrade Pan became agitated and scolded Yichun and my parents. When Yichun was quieted, Mama and Papa turned to leave. Yichun rolled over and lay on his stomach and rested his chin on his pillow. He looked at his parents, pleading silently through his tears. Outside, Mama and Papa walked for a few steps, shuffling their feet. They stared at the ground. Suddenly, Mama turned and hurried to a window. Papa followed. They watched Yichun, still lying on the floor. His woeful gaze pierced Mama's heart. She covered her face with both hands. Papa started to cry. I had been hiding in the hallway, hoping to get a last look at them. I watched as they trudged away, passing between row upon row of darkened dormitories and classroom buildings that lined the route like the ghostly ruins of a dead civilization. They embraced before Papa returned to the cowshed. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25. The children of the child care center were awakened early by supervisors. There was no breakfast. We were marched to a special spot on the street. Each of us was handed a small paper banner with a quotation from Qianmen Mao scribbled on it and instructed to wave it over our heads as the marchers approached. Our supervisors reminded us to pay attention and to shout slogans together as loud as we could when they gave this signal. 3,000 adults gathered at the athletic grounds. In the front ranks were the revolutionary faculty, staff, and students. Behind them were the cow demons and the rest of the university's political menagerie. They stood 4 abreast in long columns. A leader of the propaganda team addressed them. Our journey will be 100 miles. We will cover the distance in 6 days. Now, let us begin our long march. He gave a signal, and everyone cheered and waved little red books in the air. The columns turned and the journey began. I heard a sound like thunder a few blocks away. I stepped out from the other children and saw a mass of men and women approaching. Those in the front ranks held little red books and waved them over their heads while pounding the sky with their fists. As the marchers came closer, the throng lining the street, 5 and 6 deep, joined in shouting slogans. In ear-splitting blast of phrases followed another. Hundreds of spectators, those selected to remain on campus, along with the general population of Hefei, thumped drums and thrashed cymbals. With each fresh outburst from the crowd, the marchers responded with slogans. Yi-chun held both hands over his ears as he looked up at me curiously, wondering what this madness was all about. I tried to tell him, but I could not even hear my own voice. When the first marchers were a few feet from us, our supervisors began jumping in the air, waving their signs and screaming for the children to chant with them. The smaller children began to cry. I held up Yi-chun so he could see over the heads of the others. "Long live the great leader Chairman Mao!" a teacher howled. And we responded in the screeching salvo. "Long live the great leader Chairman Mao!" "Long live the revolutionary road of Chairman Mao!" the marchers shouted back, and the teachers answered, "Long live the revolutionary road of Chairman Mao!" At a signal from the teachers, the children intoned in their little voices, "Long live the revolutionary road of Chairman Mao!" Comrade Pan was leaping up and down, waving both arms in the air and screaming slogans. She snapped her head from side to side like a dog chasing a fly, and sprayed everyone near her with her spit. She sprang high into the air and came down on the foot of another supervisor. Both women screamed. Comrade Pan lost her footing and sprawled on all fours in the middle of the street. She lay there awkwardly as the marchers stepped around her. No one offered assistance. She rose slowly and limped to the side of the street. She seemed momentarily dazed. Another supervisor leaned in to her face and shrieked out a slogan. Comrade Pan once more took up the cry, but she was less energetic, and she no longer made revolutionary leaps. I saw Mama, and a short distance behind her, Papa. They were both bent beneath the weight of their packs. "There's Mama and Papa," I said to Yi-chun. I put him down and took his hand and ran to Mama. She broke ranks and approached us. "Mama!" I cried. She embraced Yi-chun. She examined his face and pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his running nose. He'd caught a cold. She squeezed his hands and said, "Be a good boy, Yi-chun. Bye-bye." She hurried back to her place in the column. I turned to look for my father. I waved and pointed him out to Yi-chun. Papa looked at us forlornly. He forced a smile, but I saw his eyes were shining with tears. "Goodbye, Papa," I called and raised my hand. In an instant, he too was gone. At the end of Papa's group was a big four-wheeled cart. It was pulled by several men harnessed to it. Among them were the president and the party secretary of the university. On the cart were the bedrolls and the bags of the Red Guards and the propaganda team members. At the end of the parade was a bus with only a driver in it. The bus was there in case any marchers collapsed and could not be revived. but later they were sure to be subject to accusations and criticism for anti-revolutionary exhaustion. After 6 days, the marchers arrived at their destination and were assigned to several villages. Mama was sent to live with a family in Liushan village. A young Red Guard was chosen to live with her and report on her labor and behavior to supervising officials. Papa was assigned to a room with 11 other cow demons in the peasant's hut in nearby Nan village. The men worked during the day, attended criticism meetings in the evening, and slept on the dirt floor at night as they learned from the peasants. Mama agonized over the 3 of us in Hefei. She had never been away from my brothers, yet she could not betray her feelings to the young woman watching her for fear of being accused of bourgeois sentimentality. She was so preoccupied with our condition that there were times she feared she was losing her mind. She worried that she might become ill and incapable of caring for us when we were united. After the migrants were settled, the propaganda team leader announced an iron rule. Under no circumstance, he said, will anyone be allowed to return to Hefei. If someone dies in the village, he will be buried here. This, Mama concluded, was to discourage suicide among the cow demons and snake spirits. There was no hope of ever going home, dead or alive. The Iron Rule, however, did not apply to the propaganda team members. The ruling elite went back to Hefei whenever they wished and returned to the village with warm clothes and food for themselves and their comrades. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26. The 3 of us adjusted to life in the child care center. At mealtime, one of the supervisors made an announcement, and we walked to the classrooms to eat with the younger children. The food, usually a bowl of rice porridge, was put before each of us. All children, regardless of age, were given the same portion. Each child was provided with a tin cup and large thermoses of boiled water were placed in the room each morning for drinking. A single latrine that consisted of a room with several stalls and holes in the concrete floor was divided into boys' and girls' sections. Iron water pipes with faucets projected from the wall over a drain in the floor. That was where we brushed our teeth and washed ourselves and our clothing. There was no hot water. Soap was rationed at 1 cake per family per month. Toothpaste was a concoction that looked and tasted like white glue and was also rationed. The cook was a middle-aged man we called Uncle Liu. He had been a peasant and worked in the countryside most of his life. He had dark, leathery skin and a mustache, the only one I'd ever seen. Shortly after we arrived at the center, Yiding became Uncle Liu's assistant. After dinner each evening, Yiding sneaked food to Yichun, Xiaolan, and me in his pockets. Some days he brought a fistful of rice he'd scraped from a pot, and sometimes small pieces of meat or vegetables Uncle Liu had given him as a reward for his hard work. We had to go outside to eat the extra food so that the other children wouldn't report us. We were allowed to write one letter each month to our parents. Everything we wrote had to be preceded and followed by effusive praise for Chairman Mao. I managed to get a little news in my letters to Mama, but my words made her sadder, and she missed us even more. Classes resumed several months later, when fighting between the Red Guard factions ceased. Xiaolan and I walked to our school together after breakfast. We returned to the center for lunch. At the end of each day, we did our homework while sitting on our bedding. I did the laundry for my brothers, washing their bedding and clothing by hand. I also mended their shirts and trousers and socks. Divisions between red and black families persisted among the younger children. One afternoon, I found Yichun standing with his face pressed to the cold window pane, while the other children played nearby. "Yichun," I called to him, "let's go outside." I bundled him up and took him to the playground. He loved to ride the merry-go-round. It was a little hand-pushed wheel with wooden animals mounted on it. I helped him climb onto a horse and pushed it around and ran beside him. He came out of his grim mood and began laughing and shouting, "Faster! Faster!" I recalled how delighted he had been when our parents had brought him here on weekends in the past. As the weeks passed, the amount of food we were given each day decreased. Some days the vegetables were skipped, and some weeks there was no meat. Sometimes they served us all baby food for several days in a row. We licked our bowls clean. Mama sent ration coupons, and on the way to the center for school, I'd look for a black market. When I found food, I gave almost all of it to my brothers, just as Grandma once had done for me. Mama sent us a bag of peanuts. Yiding was in charge of the peanut distribution. He gave them to us, one per person per day, until they ran out. Xiaolan and I talked about food constantly. We remembered and described the meals our mothers prepared. We dreamed of food. I awakened in the middle of the night, aching with hunger. As everyone else slept, I opened my bag, squeezed several beads of toothpaste into my mouth, and chewed on it as long as possible before swallowing it. I went to Yichun's room each night, covered him, and sat on his mat, and told him stories to lure him to sleep. The stories he liked best were those Papa told him, the ones I'd heard from my hiding place. The older boys and girls gathered in one room and told stories. We took turns. Xiaolan told wonderful tales from Chinese folklore. I tried to reconstruct The Count of Monte Cristo, but found I'd forgotten long parts of the story. I sometimes confused my attentive listeners, so I improvised. I remembered well, however, the final words: wait and hope. I whispered them as a magical conclusion. Yiding was the best storyteller among us. We gathered around him when he launched his colorful epics. One night, he told so many stories that we were up until dawn. We could not be roused for breakfast. The supervisors asked us why we were exhausted, and one of the boys confessed, because we were listening to Yiding tell stories last night. The supervisors were angry and ordered Yiding to stop telling stories. During the next few nights, Comrade Pan stuck her head in the door to make sure no one was talking. The weather became colder. Our clothes were threadbare, and I kept them together through constant sewing, letting out hems, and stitching on patches. Yiding and I returned to our apartment and retrieved more clothing. The building was empty. We discovered the glass in the apartment door had been broken, but everything appeared to be the way Mama had left it. We poured shards of broken glass from the pane and nailed a board over it. We picked up winter clothing and returned to the center. In order to stay warm, we put on all of our clothing. I huddled on my mat beneath a pile of blankets with Xiaolan. We lay together, shivering and listening to the wind and the sleet thresh the windows. Yicun complained that he was so cold he could not sleep. I worried about him constantly. Each week he became increasingly withdrawn. At night he was afraid to go alone through the unlit hall to the latrine. He began wetting his bed. The supervisors were incensed. They forced him to sleep on his damp bedding. One time, he had a bowel movement in bed. Comrade Pan was furious. She threatened to throw him out. Yicun burst into tears and called for Mama. Comrade Pan and the other supervisors concluded the only way to prevent a recurrence was to deprive him of dinner. During the dinner hour, he sat on his mat and watched the other children eat. When I saw him that night, he whispered, "Big sister, I want to go home. I'm hungry." I was about to say, "I'm hungry too," but stopped myself. I went to my room and squirted toothpaste onto my palm. I returned to Yicun and told him I had candy for him. "Close your eyes," I said. I rubbed the toothpaste on his tongue. He tasted, chewed it, and asked, "Are you sure this is candy?" "Yes," I said. "Xiaolan gave it to me." He smiled and licked his lips and asked for more. I told him that Papa and Mama would return soon, and then we could all live at home and eat all we wanted. End of chapter 27.